All right, everybody, I've started the recording for the session. And to get us kind of booted up, I'm going to welcome you all to session 2E at the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. My name is Christina Kellum. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am the Library Production Associate at the University of North Texas and a member of the TCDL Planning Committee. I will be moderating today's session. So first, some housekeeping rules. Texas Digital Library and the TCDL Planning Committee are dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. So we ask that everyone here today be considerate and respectful in speech and action, attempt collaboration before conflict, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and be mindful of your environment and of your fellow participants. You can also view our code of conduct on the homepage of the conference. This session will run until approximately 2:50 p.m., so feel free to take a break as you need. I invite you to say hello in chat, let us know where you're joining from, share any resources, and make comments throughout today's lightning talks. You are also encouraged to post your questions in the Q&A section of the Whova platform, where you can also vote on other questions that you would like other speakers, or like our speakers to answer. I'll be watching for your Q&A and making sure that I'm directing them to the right people. And now on with the show. So I'm going to be pleased to introduce our first speakers, which is going to be Ailey Pankinen and Marcia McIntosh. Go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone. Today we'll be presenting on Carry On, One Digitization Lab's Journey Through Temporary Displacement. And I'm Marcia McIntosh.
And I'm Ailey Pankinen.
And that is our snowy colleague, Shannon Willis, who also contributed to this presentation. We all work in the Digital Projects Lab at the University of North Texas, where we digitize materials for two platforms, the Portal to Texas History and the UNT Digital Library. In fall of 2019, our library building began an extensive upgrade to its mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, MEP, and a renovation of the first floor. Every floor got this brand new column in the middle, and the changes required that each of the 5 floors of the library closed for several weeks while the upgrades were installed. Staff members were told ahead of time that this was going to happen, and so we were given a heads up so we could prepare for it. And the Digital Projects Lab is on the 3rd floor, so it was the 2nd floor to close.
We were allowed to choose from open rooms on different floors as our temporary workspace, the 2 main choices being the glass-walled room 250H and the former computer lab room 443. We selected 443 as our main space because it's enclosed, lockable, and generally more cozy than the glass bowl option on the 2nd floor. We also got stations in the metadata suite, room 433, for our metadata workers, since it was already intended for metadata use and had free stations available.
Not all of our lab digitization equipment can be easily moved. Some machines just don't move at all, like our R2S A1 quart scanner, and some equipment we just prefer not to move because when parts are relocated, they get jostled. For example, our Epson scanners. So we limited ourselves to machines that were transportable and would be less impacted by a change in location, our Sony negative scanning station and our Fujitsu duplex scanners. We did anticipate that we would be able to borrow time on an Epson flatbed scanner in our special collection department on the 4th floor if needed.
Next, we drew a map of the space and where we'd like to set up student workstations and full-time staff in the 2 spaces. And we were also encouraged to have open desk stations in case other staff members who would be working from home needed a spot to work on campus back before Zoom meetings were a thing.
Since we would only be moving certain equipment that could be easily relocated, we had to be strategic about scheduling the digitization of different collections leading up to the lab's closure. Over the preceding months, as soon as we knew we would eventually need to temporarily move our digitization operations, we planned which projects needed to be completed before then, which ones needed to wait to be worked on while we were in our temporary space, and which ones could wait until we were able to move back into the lab. We delayed some projects because they could be easily done in the temporary space. Other projects we digitized before the move, but delayed the processing of the images since processing could be done easily without the equipment.
Next, based on our plan for work during our relocation, we determined what projects or parts of projects needed to move with us during the expected closure and which would stay put in the lab. And we also communicated with partners who plan to deliver projects during the closure period that they should either bring them before our floor closed or reschedule until after we return to our space.
With a plan for the space, projects, and digitization to be moved, we were able to identify which computer stations out of the 28 needed to be moved to the different rooms. Because in previous years, we had named and labeled all of our lab computers according to their location, we were able to easily list the names of the computer stations to be moved and label where they would go on a map of the temporary space. All staff computers were also marked to be moved.
Finally, having learned from staff and facilities about the fourth floor's closure experience, we made sure to identify and list all of the office supplies and digitization accessories that we wanted to make sure came with us.
With all of our plans in place and our many pieces of documentation ready, we embarked on the execution phase of the Great Move in early 2020, the last week of January and early February. The process went smoothly thanks to our preparation and planning. With the map, we knew where to configure the furniture in the room. Our IT workers, we call TACO, knew how to hook up the cables and computers. We knew where to set up each type of equipment and staff station, and the students helped move by carrying supplies and pushing carts. We brought the consolidated racks for the project that would come with us upstairs. We also made a mini version of our massive whiteboard that we used to track projects. Both rooms had both a rack and a whiteboard. Then we prepared the lab to be under construction. We made sure all of the projects remaining in the lab were covered, boxed up and secured, ensuring to label any that were moved into new boxes. We also fully covered all equipment, tables, and remaining computer stations to protect them from falling dust.
All the planning and strategizing we'd done meant we were able to continue to move projects forward despite being displaced. We kept our productivity up and kept student workers busy. All of our student employees proved to be incredibly flexible and adaptable. The computer names we had set up years before turned out to be a real boon. It made it so much easier for communicating with TACO and giving directions to students and staff about where different stations, like what different software and different specs needed to go. We were occasionally allowed to adventure into our lab in hard hat, glasses, and neon vests to switch out projects as needed throughout the time in our temporary space, but access was limited to certain times of the day and it could be dark. We were also able to move back into our lab reasonably quickly and smoothly once our floor was reopened, and moving back, unsurprisingly, was much easier than the initial relocation.
And then there was COVID. The lab got a heads up that we would be closing and were able to do some bulk scanning that we could use during the closure period. We locked our doors at the end of March 24th and were closed March 25th through May 8th of 2020. The work we did for MEP turned out to be good preparation for the pandemic. Both students and staffs were used to being flexible and adapting to unusual situations.
All our documentation about our computer stations, their specs matched with their names, has also been immensely useful, both for assigning students to stations for remote work and for relocating stations within the physical space of the lab to allow for greater social distancing. We've also reused the process of working up large backlogs of images to be processed later. So we've shot or scanned projects en masse during COVID and then left processing to be done by remote workers. And in general, both MEP and COVID have gotten us to rethink our normal imaging workflows and start to think about how we can better maximize the use of our highest capacity machines. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started for Emily Vincent and Andrew Widener. Let me double check myself. There it is.
Thank you. We can go ahead and advance. I'm Emily Vincent. My colleague Andrew Weiner and I will be presenting a brief overview of a project undertaken during the COVID-19 campus closure by members of the University of Houston Special Collections and Metadata and Digitization Services departments to keep our typically on-site student staff employed while improving the accessibility of our archival video collections online, particularly to deaf and hard of hearing users. The project plan was developed and launched very quickly and has successfully run for the last 15 months. Slide. Before we discuss remote student closed captioning project, I'd like to provide a bit of background that helped lay the groundwork for this project's success. Over the past 6 years, our library has greatly expanded its AV digitization program. And with this expansion, the number of AV items on our digital platform has grown exponentially. With this in mind, I applied for an opportunity within the University of Houston Libraries called the Rooks Early Career Librarian Fellowship to assess the cost and accuracy of various methods of transcription. This internal grant provided a small budget for 3 years to support research. And so I set about learning more about transcription and captioning, designing a study, and testing various methods. Slide. For this project, I decided to compare 4 methods of transcription, which included professional transcription services, online AI machine-generated services, free hacks like YouTube, and untrained study participants drawn from within the libraries. Next slide. In order to create a study that reflected the types of materials that would be encountered in an archival AV collection, I selected video samples from our collection that reflected a range of issues that can affect quality. My samples included recordings that were both very clear as well as ones that might prove difficult, such as multiple speakers speaking over each other, multiple languages within a given recording, and many other issues. Next slide. In this chart, you can see the error rate of each tested method for the videos. I've simplified it to show the average rate of errors across 5 sample videos for each service. The red line moving across the graph shows the cost noted in price per minute on the right-hand side. I know it's hard to read too much of a graph in a quick setting like this, but basically it breaks down to professional services are very accurate, however, they are expensive. Online machine-generated services are very inexpensive, but have the highest rate of errors, and study participants vary the most in terms of accuracy. Next slide. At this point, I want to shift gears slightly. The research study I've described was concerned with transcriptions. However, closed captions required a specialized file format to ensure the text is synced to the audio track of a video. At UH, we use the Avalon Media system to deliver our archival video. Avalon and many other media players sync transcripts using the WebVTT file format. This format features a specific timestamp in the hour, minute, second, millisecond format. On the left side of your screen, you can see an example of that file format. And the number of lines and number of characters per line displayed in the WebVTT file will be reflected in the caption formatting on the associated video. So on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, you can see what the video actually looks like. This format would be extremely tedious and time-consuming to create from scratch. However, the machine-generated services included in the transcription study do offer the WebVTT format as a downloadable option. Next slide. So shifting to our project. As the realities of the coronavirus pandemic came into sharp focus, the University of Houston moved classes online. Shortly thereafter, our campus, including the libraries, closed, moving all services online. Almost as soon as classes went online, we began to think about how we could retain our library student employees by captioning online video, captioning online videos seemed ideal, as it was a win-win for our student employees and for enhancing accessibility to our collections. In order to facilitate a quick startup, we opted to use the Rooks Librarian Fellowship budget to pay for one of the inexpensive online machine-generated programs to create rough WebVTT files, from which our students would correct for accuracy of both the content and timing. On this slide, you can see a timeline of our remote student captioning project. On March 16th, UH classes went online, and most library departments transitioned to remote work. 2 days later, the idea for this project was proposed to a department head, and that same day, our library's administration approved going forward with the project. The following day was the first meeting of our project manager team, and within a week, we had met again to finalize some training, and quickly thereafter, Harris County issued a stay-at-home order and all library departments began to work remotely. On March 26th, we had recruited about 24 students to work on the project, and we hosted our first Zoom training, and the following day hosted a second training for a related project utilizing students with bilingual Spanish, English skills to create oral history transcripts. By the following week, transcription correction was well underway, and in early April, we identified several students who had shown an aptitude for the work to work as QCers for the materials being corrected by the general transcription work students. And by week 5, both the transcription and quality control work were well underway. So with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Emily. Slide, please. As Emily mentioned, we spun up this project really quickly, and we had about 24 students across 5 different departments who had their original supervisors and were now expected to report to the project management team. So we very quickly set up communication channels with existing platforms that we had. We communicated with the supervisors via a Microsoft Teams group, and we communicated with our students via Slack. We set up a channel for all the students on the project, and we used both of these platforms to keep in touch with both our students and the student supervisors on a regular basis as we were setting things up. Throughout the entire time, we did use Zoom quite a bit for the trainings that Emily mentioned. We used email to distribute training materials, and we used Google products, including Calendar and Drive, heavily to keep track of student schedules and to distribute documentation for the project. Next slide, please. Some of the tools that we used for this project are Sonics, that's the automatic transcript generation service, Dropbox that we use to distribute videos and transcript files, Google Drive for transcript versioning and progress tracking. The VLC Media Player is a free video playback tool that the students use to watch the videos, and it has a number of plugins that are helpful for this kind of work, and the Atom text editor for transcript editing. Next slide, please. This is a very brief overview of our workflow. Transcripts were created with Sonics and then uploaded to Dropbox, where students then downloaded both the video and their WebTT file for transcript correction. They uploaded that version back up to Google Drive, where the quality control student would download it, edit the transcript for timestamps and clarity, and then re-upload it back to Google Drive, where Emily would download it again and upload it to Avalon for a new transcript. Next slide, please. A number of successes that we had. Over 30% of all online videos now have caption correction complete. We raised awareness of accessibility issues within the UH libraries and among student employees. We kept about 30 students employed remotely during the course of the pandemic for this year, over a year. And we developed an effective workflow to continue creating accessible video content for all the videos in our repository. And with that, we want to thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to your questions if you have any at the end.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and get the video started for Alyssa Franklin. She is here today, so there's no worries there, but we just want to make sure, or she just pre-recorded a video, which is nice. There it is.
My presentation today is entitled Pandemic Problem Solving, Creating a Transcription Workflow Process for Student Employees on the Fly. So a quick look at the timeline, which I'm sure we can all relate to. On March 15th of 2020, UTSA extended our spring break for an additional week to figure out what to do with the pandemic hitting Texas. By March 21st, the university had completed the second week of the extended spring break, and we had completely switched to remote workflow until further notice, remote work modality until further notice. And this also
I'm sorry. It looks like we couldn't see it. Let me restart that. Sorry, everybody. We will get there. I am so sorry. Let's share that whole desktop and see if that will work for us. Is it still there?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Franklin. I'm the digitization specialist at UTSA Libraries Special Collections. My presentation today is entitled Pandemic Problem Solving, Creating a Transcription Workflow Process for Student Employees on the Fly. So a quick look at the timeline, which I'm sure we can all relate to. On March 15th of 2020, UTSA extended our spring break for an additional week to figure out what to do with the pandemic hitting Texas. By March 21st, the university had completed the second week of the extended spring break, and we had completely switched to remote workflow until further notice, remote work modality until further notice. And this also included student employees and classroom instruction. So we entered April with 5 student employees that are in the wind for our department, Special Collections. So what do we do with 5 employees whose work up until this point had been completely based on being on site, handling physical materials? We had never had a student work remotely before. So we came up with a solution to create a transcription generation workflow as well as OCR editing that students could do remotely from home and create a process where it was all online and could be handled with minimal tools and minimal software that they theoretically would just have on their personal laptops at home, and then be able to submit everything in Google Drive and review each other's work, and the entire system would be self-sustaining until it got to an endpoint where a Special Collections employee would need to upload final projects into our digital library and content DM. So by mid-April, we had tested our workflow, we'd implemented it, and we had done a bunch of research, and we started training our students. And I'm really happy to say that by the start of May, we had all of our students up and running. The transcription process was going really smoothly for the most part. And the most important thing, in my opinion, is that they were able to stay employed, feel valued, and produce important work and stay working for us through the summer. And I don't know what we would have done had we not come up with a remote work solution for our students. So this is a pretty basic workflow, but we just use sign-up sheets in Google Drive. Students reviewed each other's work and they moved the documents into corresponding folders. So the first draft of a transcript would go into the first draft folder. The student would update the appropriate sign-up sheet, and then a second student can sign up on that line of the sheet, moved their work once they've reviewed into the second draft folder, and then I would come in at the end of the workflow and upload it in completed folder, and we would, anything that had been completed with a secondary review would end up going into the digital library and would be considered a completed transcript. And I wanted to, this is an example of a vintage UTSA commercial, and that's how it's hosted. A lot of our video is hosted in Media Library. And you can see on the right what the transcript, the VTT file with the timestamps looks like. And I wanted to play that for you guys really quickly, and we could see the edited transcript in action.
In Northwest San Antonio, a growing institution for development and opportunity in the lives of all South Texans, UTSA, a beautiful rolling tree-covered 600-acre campus. UTSA, conceived to offer intellectual, cultural, economic opportunities to all residents of the Pacific region. UTSA, what's in it for you? A bachelor's or master's degree in any one of 43 programs at reasonable state college rates. A first-class faculty with 90% of them holding doctoral degrees. The newest and most striking campus in South Texas.
And so I just thought that vintage commercial was a great way to illustrate once the edits for the transcripts have been made and then uploaded into either Media Library or Content DM, depending on the nature of the material, that's them in action. And at least in our experience using media libraries automatically generated captioning, it would just produce nonsense for us. So it wasn't usable. So we went from having no closed captioning on these types of digital materials to completely functional, human edited and checked captioning. And I think it was a great use of our students' time, and also the opportunity to create, to expand accessibility for our collections. And you'll see here, this is just a screen grab of what our project tracking sheets look like. It's pretty simple. It was just a Google sheet, and people were able to edit and sign up and update, track time spent, all of that. This is just if students had Notepad++, this is what the transcripts would look like when the BTT files were uploaded into, like, as text documents with the timestamps. But this also worked in any basic text editor. We just had to be clear that they shouldn't adjust the rows that have the timestamps on them, and as long as that ordering wasn't altered in any way, the free text fields and the lines where the automatically generated captions were what we had to work with. And so that could all be manipulated to read accurately, and we could attempt to time the words as best we could within those predetermined time constraints. And this is just a screen grab of another example of multiple people speaking in an interview, and kind of the style guide that we had come up with of putting speakers' names in brackets and all of those things, indicating when voices switched. We also had an example of a video that had speakers in both Spanish and English, and the video was already captioned. The Spanish speaker was captioned in English, but we felt it was important to also, in the closed captioning, document the sound that was actually produced in the video, which was Spanish language. So we were able to incorporate that into our closed captioning. And that's about it. I just wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of a solution that we came up with here at UTSA that we're really happy with, and we're going to continue to implement as we digitize new audio and video materials. And I appreciate all of your time. I hope everybody's having a great time at TCDL so far, and I'll see you guys later for any questions. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Next is going to be Sean.
Okay, thank you. First, I'd like to quickly mention that unfortunately Jarrell Jones will not be able to attend due to some last-minute schedule changes, but he does really wish he could be here. My name is Sean Watkins. I'm the lead repository developer for the University of Houston, and I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about how curiosity combined with a pandemic, a digital library migration, and working with a new team made the goal of automating image processing even possible. But how did we actually get started? First was determining some of the problems that we had within our digital image processing. One of the big ones was, of course, processing batches of images is time consuming and oftentimes spends hours that we would like to do other things with. And if we can eliminate that time so that we can go off and have our staff and students work on other things, we certainly wanted to make that possible. We also had certain needs. We wanted to standardize some of our image data. At the same time, we could not and should not automate all of our image processing, but we should automate as much as we possibly can. We also knew that siloed tools, while effective, could eventually be detrimental, and we wanted to adapt to any possible changes that headed our way. Bearing in mind that all of this was going on, while also the digitization workflow was being worked out and being improved upon, an illustration which you have there in the right-hand corner. So our progression of how all of this came to be. This slide provides a quick roadmap about how we arrived to our initial and final goal of integrating all of these tools into our digital management tool called Mason, We first started with the command line, experimenting with ImageMagick. From there, a set of Ruby workflow tools was developed, which enabled some of digital images to be converted, image data validation, and of course, quality control based off of a predictable directory structure. From there, more experimentations with ImageMagick happened, along with some of the file management functions you find within a basic command line. Further talks happened and data was tested upon and later introduced into full production use. Later with the DAMS implementation team, talks were generated in order to actually integrate some of these tools into Mason to make things much more automated. Through all of this, a lot of testing was done. And this just shows a quick flow of all the things that were done in order to test these tools to ensure that they were exactly what we needed to do. Starting from a needs assessment, along with a lot of research involved with them, a lot of testing, finalizing these scripts, and in the end result, having somewhat of a cookbook, as you say, in the upper right-hand corner of a list of all the command lines that could easily be copied and pasted into our command line in order to make those processing possible. However, the next step, as far as bringing it into our main tools to make automation happening, we did actually have to streamline some of our processes that we already had in place and were using. One of which was combining two separate tools that we had been using for our digital project management. Braze, which is our metadata editor, along with Carpenter's, which was a file management tool that we use to process all our digital collections. It was key for us to merge both of those applications into one, which we've dubbed Mason. This allowed our cross-functional team to actually work as one throughout the entire digital process for migration of digital collections and possibly new collections as they come into the future. Once that process of combining those tools were made, we can then talk about some of the command line tools that were used within digitization. We adapted those by using things like paper workflows and of course the command lines themselves to determine exactly how we might incorporate those tools within our Mason application, along with some of the options that actually were key in order to make this work. All of this process was done through our team's agile Scrum process and iterative processes that we actually use throughout development. We do this within a 3-week working cycle, which we call sprints. And each 3 weeks, we go through planning for the development, the actual development of the tool itself, the actual production of the product itself, and getting that in front of the actual people using the tools in order so we can continue testing, identify gaps, and of course, creating features, which we call user stories, in order to bridge the gaps that have been identified during that testing. All of that happens within a 3-week period, of which we then go rinse and repeat. Of course, during this time, we also came across a lot of limitations, but also opportunities as well, specifically with ImageMagick. Generally, ImageMagick does actually shine with batch creation and access files, but it does have some really nasty effects as well. One of which is it's very easy within the syntax to quickly overwrite your files or actually destroy them as well. So we found out very quickly that backups were just a necessity to ensure that we don't lose any of our data when playing around with ImageMagick with these batch processes. Lastly, we just wanted to actually talk about some of the key things to really kind of walk away with during this process of this integration and processing, which is ImageMagick is a highly effective tool, but does require some upfront work. Siloed and collaborative tools must be evolved as you work, and continuously pursue transparency with teammates, being open with what is going on and how it's going on. Inspect your process and your work and adapt to those changes as they come along. And of course, backups, backups, backups. So I want to thank you all for your time and certainly look forward to any questions you might have later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Erin.
Hello. All right, let me get my screen shared. I'm happy to kick off this last presentation today. So I'm going to be spotlighting today our camera capture stations at Texas State University. And I'd also like to thank Todd Peters, my supervisor, for not only help with the presentation, but with supporting us continuing and modifying these capture stations for several years now. So back in 2017, the library received a TSLAC Textrizers grant funded by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services so that we could research and build 2 film capture stations and digitize the at-risk photographic negatives in the university archives. These particular negatives came from a recently received collection from the San Marcos Daily Record that spans about 70 years. And it starts in the mid-1930s to the 2000s, which the earliest ones were the most at risk. And those were the terms of the grant, but the stations have now been operational for several years, since about March 2017, and have digitized since thousands of negatives. So I thought that this was an appropriate time to go ahead and update and let y'all know where we're at with these stations and what has been done since, especially because this kind of station is both more common now, but more people are kind of looking into what a camera capture station might be able to do for them on a smaller scale than maybe the full sort of digital transition stations that are pretty common at universities. So a brief overview in the beginning: a camera capture station is intended to get rid of the scanner entirely from the process of creating derivatives. So there is a camera, and in the case of doing negative capture, you have a film holder with negative and a light box underneath it. The camera is vertically mounted to a copy stand. It keeps the lens level with the film holder below, and you have a technician that loads the negatives into that holder, and in our case uses a foot pedal, usually for contactless capture. And we have the images go directly to our Capture One software for review and processing at that point. And I'm happy to talk about the actual nitty-gritty of the results, but they are more efficient and higher quality images than equivalent flatbed files. They also keep students more engaged in the active process of capturing, because there isn't that downtime when it comes to scanning that's just too long to do anything productive in the in-between. So here's a flashback to the past of our original stations, of which most is still in operation today. The Alienware, R6 computer, and the NEC monitor for image quality. We have a Kaiser motorized copy stand, and we still use the Sony Alpha A7R2 digital cameras. There are 2 versions above this, but they are still a powerful full frame workhorse camera that I highly recommend. Our main negative lens hasn't changed as well. It's a Sony FE macro 90mm lens. And we originally used a Manfrotto 3-way tripod head, a LightPad Pro box, and some darkroom equipment in the form of a negative carrier, plus a foot switch. And to benchmark our stations, we used a preservation microfilm target from ISA. So over time, we've added a few things to the station, and but like I said, most of it is still actually in operation pending future replacements as they come. But we've added some focusing rails, an Arca Swiss cube, a new and improved light box, a custom aluminum frame, some magnetic film holders that are not quite yet in operation because they depend on some components of the frame. And instead of having 2 dedicated negative stations, the second station is transitioned into a flexible station for reflective and transmissive material both. I am looking at future updates for these stations right now, and some of those are going to be that the film capture station is going to get the addition of some leveling feet and a new adjustable platform so that we can take advantage of those magnetic film holders. I would also like to upgrade our now discontinued microfilm target to the standard format targets from ISA for film, and at least our most commonly used sizes. Other possibilities include creating some new XY table, a lot, as much as the imagination can, but I'd like to get fully functional on the equipment that we have before that point. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on this. I'm going to be brief about going into the equipment on here just for the sake of time, but the Kirk focusing rails are a nice tool. So the RSD columns move backwards and forwards, already to adjust where the camera is positioned over the copy stand base. But with the addition of the Kirk rails, you can go and create another axis, effectively creating an XY stage. And we've used that for stitching multiple images together. It has its bumps and its difficulties, but it means that we can keep fragile material in place while it's imaged. You do have to watch out for uneven lighting if you do this, and make sure that you set up for the entire stage of lighting to be even across, rather than having a little bit of brightness in one corner that is unanticipated. You can also use it for fine focusing adjustment if you mount it vertically as well. And it does add a little bit of extra weight, and the camera is now further from the copy stand, so this is a consideration. And it creates an additional attachment point that can be a weakness. Over the Manfrotto three-way tripod head that we used for adjusting the level of the copy stand, we bought a Arca Swiss Cube that's now in operation with our negative station. It's a little bit shorter, which is really nice, and it locks in place in a much more reliable way. You're less likely to bump it. So overall, it's a little bit less weight. It's about the same as the weight, but it's a little shorter is the main benefit of this one. We also upgraded our light box to one that's specifically designed for digital capture of transmissive material. Gives us a nice large workspace that we can do more film types, and it's more reliable than the LightPad Pro when it comes to even lighting. It's also incredibly bright, which helped us when we had our own move to another space that was no longer on our nice slab foundation, but was up on the 5th and 7th floors for a time. All right, here's a look at our current configuration for our flexible capture station. It is set up for negative capture right now with a separate project. But you can see that we also have some GVM LED lights on the side that we use for capture, and we purchased a Sony FE 2.8 50mm macro lens. The macro really helps our flexibility when it comes to a station. It means that we can use it for more types of material than we'd be able to for a larger station. And we've used it now for negatives, bound material, flat material, and multi-image stitching, which I have an example of on the next slide. So this is an image of Russell Lee that a museum wanted to print on a wall at 100 pixels per inch print quality. So it's about 3 by 4 inches. So we ended up having to take 6 shots to stitch it together. And our lovely students at the time posed for us to give us a sense of scale when we printed it out to see how that would look and make sure we'd done our work properly. The thing that's probably undergone the most modification is the custom negative capture stage. Here's a look at it. So this is, if you saw the first image of the capture station, this is more or less what it looks like now. This is set up in a standing configuration, which just means that the tech that works on it most of the time likes to put the keyboard up mounted so that she can use the keyboard commands while she moves through the workflow. It speeds it up a little bit, but can be used sitting as well. So we have a stage that was designed with the assistance of Doa Brock, who's the makerspace coordinator here at Texas State. And he introduced me to extruded aluminum T-slots from 8020, which are pretty fabulous. You can get them elsewhere as well, but these were already basically tailor-made for what we needed. And this was constructed and put together and tested in 2020. So you can see right here that this is designed to actually sit around our light box itself and include sort of a stage that we can balance it, but still have a lifted space above. It does adjust to multiple kinds of characters, and it's something that's modular and easier to add. This was created, Digital Transitions has a wonderful film negative stage that they use, but it was not going to be in our 2020 budget. So I looked at options that would still get us to have a stage that was just mounted above. And for anybody that can see me as a spotlight, this was the original prototype that we tested, was just a couple of blocks of wood that we put together with foam to make sure that the whole concept would work and could remain stable. It does this does include a built-in support system for the Kaiser ProLight, which is very nice too. It does have a few limitations right now. This is still a work in progress. The negative carry does not currently lock into place. And the digital transitions holders we bought don't fit smoothly into it. It's doesn't adjust as quickly either with the current rails. So I'd like to get a more flexible sliding system in there. And now we are currently using the LightPad Pro while the Pro Light is being repaired. I would also like to add in a feature that increases our ability to control the amount of light that reaches the negative and block out light that we don't want around the edges of it. Here's just a quick picture of the station right now. You can see that our negative carriers as we currently have them, there is a lot of light that gets around the side, but they do mount a variety of film sizes. So they're very, very flexible with an anti-Newton glass on the bottom that helps us out when it comes to pressing the negative so tightly between two surfaces. And thank you all for attending today. And thank you to many people that have helped me along the way in getting this, including my predecessor here, who designed the station in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to go ahead and open this all up to questions, or if anybody wants to have anything clarified. Speakers, if there's anything that you wanted to add that you felt like you didn't have the time to, you can also do it here as well. So far, we don't have any questions in the chat, which means y'all probably all did amazing because you did, but that just confirms that you were very clear and concise. I had a question for Erin, though. Speaking of the leveling legs, did that come inspired because you had to move to a different location and then moved back, or?
Partly, but it's more to do with our old tables. They aren't necessarily level across the entire surface, being made of wood. And we have had to move them several times. So things always get knocked a little bit loose. We have several different surfaces to level. It's nice to be able to get those leveled independently of each other and just then leave them alone.
Yeah, if we could never move the stuff, we would, which is an example from Marcia and Ailey. So we didn't want to move things.
No.
An additional question that could come is we have a lot of people working on transcriptions while we were in shutdown. What was how long did it take the training? Did you feel like your training was easy for training students, or was it pulling teeth for a little bit, or was it a mashup? You had people who were really great and got it really well, and then people that just struggled. Kind of want to know your stories there.
I would say our students really were amazing. Like they were, and especially because our students, none of them worked either in special, well, a few of them worked in metadata and digitization services, but none of them worked in special collections. So they were coming from very different types of positions. So this was really brand new and they took to it really quickly. So we were totally amazed.
We also had the benefit of one of our staff members in the digitization unit he had been working on capture of images for various special collections materials. And then when we proposed this project, we learned that he had done transcriptions and closed captions professionally for a while for a company. So that really helped our training process. He knew exactly what to do and he explained concepts very clearly. And so that certainly helped train our students in what needed to be done.
I would echo everything they said, but I am jealous we didn't have a colleague that was formally professional when it came to transcription. So we were just learning on the fly, but I think we did a great job and our students handled such a big change, not just with their work environment and their projects, but their entire lives being upended with the school going remotely. And I thought they just did such a wonderful job. And there were definitely students that had more of a knack for catching the timing and everything, but they were also excited to be learning a new project and such detail-oriented workers that we were happy with everyone. They did a great job and continue to do so. We still work on transcripts.
I do have one question that came from the chat, which is, if you were to create a GIF or a meme, if there was a meme that you could describe, for the unexpected good news that came from COVID, from our time here, because it seems that everybody took a turn and made everything productive, or at least had some good news from it, what would it be? I think mine would be the guy in the house on fire and saying, "This is fine." If you can't think of one, that's fine. You can just say people grew a lot of plants. Or we got self-leveling tables, which would be nice. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'd also like to encourage everyone here to join us for any upcoming TCDL sessions for the rest of the day, or come back tomorrow. Take a look at the poster sessions. I'm also going to include the link to the poster scavenger hunt. So just to make sure you're putting that in, because again, if you win, you get to have a book suggestion sent to you, and also free registration for next year. Also, TDL is looking to gauge interest in forming a new member group around research integrity. So this is building on the success of our brief research integrity workshop series back in February. So we have a survey for you to take, which will help us iron out some details around this group, and I'll paste it into the link, but you can also, I may go ahead and put it into an announcement from the organizers in the community tab. But for everybody else, have a great day. Thank you so much to our speakers. It was wonderful. Bye.
Thank you, Christina.